Hey guys, it's Kate, and I hope you're having a great day. I wanted to do a nice relaxing watercolor today, but also play with a lot of texture. So if you are looking for ways to add texture to your paintings, you might want to stick around for this video and see a few of the things that I try. But I'm starting off first by spraying the front and back of my paper so it's really wet. And this is actually really wet, and you can see the color kind of sits where it is because it's been sprayed quite a bit. But I'm going through with my brush and kind of spreading some colors around. I'm working with yellows and greens today, and I'll end up adding a little bit of the Indian red from the Marie's Masters palette that I'm working in. And I'm even going to add some more water to kind of just give things a really cloudy, dreamy kind of look. And I'm just playing and spreading some color on the page, and I'm going to make kind of a background. But what I wanted to do is just try some different tools. So I'm going to be adding texture today with a palette knife. I'll be doing some little circle stamps, and I will be also blowing some air. I got this little tool. It's a little squeeze blower, and I wanted to play with that in the wet paper. So I dipped into I think it's Umber Deep, and it's a really beautiful dark brown color. And so I put it on the paper with my brush, and then I'm hitting it with that little blower to spread it around a bit. And I really love how it spreads out on the paper, and you can get some really neat blended effects. And so this is sort of, well, it's my first time kind of playing with it on paper like that. So I'm just kind of going to town with it here, and I'll end up adding some more color. But I just like experimenting with things like this to see how it turns out, how it ends up looking in the end, how it dries. And, it's a great way to pick up new ideas for your paintings. And so it's such a fun little tool. If you don't have this tool, I think this cost me just a couple to a few dollars, but you could also use a straw. You could try blowing. I think one of the things that was sort of challenging is when you're trying to squeeze it hard enough to get good airflow, it's hard to kind of control exactly where it is, but you can control the general direction. But I'm just happily squeezing away, getting that paint spread out. And you can see that water moving, and you can even see some of the bare spots where I'm spraying or squeezing the air out. You can see where it's moving pretty much everything out of the way. And so I added that Viridian color just to add a nice little pop of cool green to the paper, and it will kind of dry into the background with everything else, but I love green and brown mixes. I think they're really beautiful. Blue and brown too, but I love green and blue anyway, no matter what. So they always tend to make an appearance in my different paintings. And I'm also working with a quill brush now, and this is a newer watercolor brush that I have. It's actually a Princeton Neptune. I'm going in with the Indian red just in a few little spots. And it's a nice, almost like a red clay color. I love it. And I'm doing dabs instead of the half circles now, just kind of switching things up. So after it dries all together, I'm going back into that Umber Deep, and I'm mixing a pretty strong mix into my palette and adding some water so it's nice and liquid. and I grabbed one of my palette knives that does some interesting textures. I got a little set of them, and so I grabbed one that I thought looked nice. And I'm going in with some very wet umber deep. And so I'm going to scrape into that with my palette knife going in one direction just to see what kind of effects I can make. And I really love that sort of strong striped look. And don't forget the background is dry completely now, so it's not going to blend in with the rest of those colors. It's just going to stand out and have a lot more contrast that way. And so I liked that. That was sort of my little experiment in the corner. So I'm going to keep going here. And I'm dabbing the brush as well as putting down brush strokes. That way I can get extra color on there so that there's more to spread with the palette knife. And I'm just going over it again. It almost would be like if you were doing a landscape, that kind of technique would do really nice grasses and things like that. But here I'm just using it in a more abstract way and just adding some contrast and texture to the page. Another thing with the palette knife is it'll kind of leave those grooves in the paper when you're rubbing it through, so the paint will also settle into those lines and make some darker marks. And you'll be able to see that when I do the close-up later. And I'm just going back through and adding in some more of that really dark color to darken it up. And then I'm going to do the same scraping marks on the top. And I really like, just sort of this accidental little composition, and it's so easy and it's just play, but I I'm liking where it's going at this point, and then kind of thinking, okay, how do I really want this page to look and what do I want to do next? So I start making some lines out to the side, almost like a grid or something like that, and I liked that. It's just a very organic, kind of grungy look. And again, I'm kind of dotting in some extra paint to darken up those centers and letting that spread out. And then I wanted to add some more texture, so I decided to do some splashes with the rest of that color that was in my mixing well. And I'm trying to add them kind of strategically in sort of a following along with the background. So I'm starting there at the bottom and working my way up around to the top of the page. And it kind of follows those dark brown masses. And then I wanted to do some more palette knife play, so I grabbed that Indian red and I just wanted to see what it would be like if I dipped my palette knife in there directly and then tried to put it on the page. But that palette knife wasn't really working that well for that. It just wasn't picking up enough paint, so it almost was adding to the splashes in a way because it just would put on a few dots here and there. So I went back in with a more solid palette knife and just tried to add a little bit of scrapes of color here and there, and it just added a little bit more texture to the background, but a little bit more muted and light colored than the dark brown. And it kind of added a little something extra to those splashes and a little bit more red to the page. And then I'm going to grab my little spray bottle lid, which I've been really loving lately, just to make some little circle stamps in my page. I'm following that same path of the splashes and splatters and just kind of reinforcing that composition so that I can draw your eye from the top to the bottom of the page in sort of a little meandering curve, I guess you could say. And then I grabbed my Naples Yellow Deep Amsterdam acrylic ink, and I started putting this on the bottom. And at this point, my brown paint is still a little bit damp. And so instead of kind of sitting on top, the ink is almost soaking into the paint a little bit and spreading out. And I didn't really want that to happen. And so I was working at it a little bit with my palette knife, and I ended up adding a couple of circles, but I just wasn't really feeling it with the ink today. And I did have some other marks on the page. So I went in and, put in some circles, but I ended up kind of abandoning that idea, although it did serve as a nice background for my gold paint marker. And I'm just sort of finishing out the circle shapes with my palette knife and spreading out that ink just a little bit to make it thinner. And it kind of leaves a nice little hint in the background. And so then I go in with my gold paint marker, which is one of my favorites. I love the sparkle on this one. And I'm making several passes, and my marker has gotten a lot of loving use, so I'm just trying my best to activate it and get some more of that paint out there so I can make a good circle. And you guys know my circles are my favorites. And I think this really ended up with a lot of great texture. I'm doing this close up here so you can see, and you can see those marks from the palette knife. Those are kind of my favorites, and I'm going to be playing more with those. And I also love how the splashes turned out and just the richness of that umber deep. But I hope you enjoyed this video today, and until next time, keep creating.